One waterway. About a fifth of the world's oil supply, and as of today, it's closed. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy has announced the Strait of Hormuz is shut until further notice. If you've ever wondered what a genuine global energy shock looks like, this might be it. Here's what we know. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, Navy has declared the Strait of Hormuz closed until further notice. That announcement came through Iranian state media and was reported by Reuters. The IRGC is not the conventional Iranian military. It's a separate, ideologically driven force that answers directly to the supreme leader, and it has operational control over Iran's naval presence in the Persian Gulf. The closure, as reported, is open-ended. No timeline, no stated conditions for reopening. Just closed until further notice. That phrase alone is enough to send a shockwave through global energy markets, and we're going to spend the next several minutes explaining exactly why. To understand why this matters so much, you need to understand what the Strait of Hormuz actually is. It's a narrow body of water, a choke point, sitting between Iran to the north and Oman and the United Arab Emirates to the south. At its narrowest point, it's only about 21 miles wide. And yet, through that sliver of ocean flows roughly a fifth of the world's total oil supply. Some estimates put it even higher when you include liquefied natural gas. Every major oil exporter in the Persian Gulf, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Iraq, Qatar, depends on the Strait of Hormuz to get their energy to the rest of the world. There is no realistic alternative for most of them. Saudi Arabia has a pipeline that can move some oil to the Red Sea coast, bypassing the strait, but it has nowhere near the capacity to replace what flows through Hormuz on a normal day. Qatar, which supplies a huge share of the world's LNG, has essentially no bypass at all. So when someone closes the Strait of Hormuz, or credibly threatens to, the entire architecture of global energy supply is suddenly in question. This isn't a regional story, it's a global one. Let's talk about how a closure like this actually works, and what kinds of effects it typically sets in motion. The Strait of Hormuz is used by enormous oil tankers, known as VLCCs, very large crude carriers. These ships are slow-moving, highly visible, and completely dependent on safe passage through that narrow channel. The moment a naval force declares the waterway closed, a few things tend to happen in sequence. First, shipping companies face an immediate decision. Do they attempt transit and risk confrontation, or do they hold position and wait? Most will wait. The liability of losing a vessel or a crew is simply too high. Second, insurance costs respond to perceived risk almost instantly. War risk premiums, which are the additional insurance charges applied to vessels operating in conflict zones or disputed waters, tend to rise sharply when a major choke point is threatened. That cost gets passed somewhere, usually to buyers. Third, the oil market begins pricing in the possibility of reduced supply. Crude that was expected to flow from the Gulf to refineries in Asia, Europe, and elsewhere now has no clear route. Futures markets, which trade on expectations of future supply and demand, are particularly sensitive to this kind of uncertainty. It's worth noting that Iran has threatened to close the strait before, most notably during periods of heightened tension with the United States and during negotiations over its nuclear program. In the past, those threats did not result in prolonged closures. But a formal declaration by the IRGC Navy, reported through state media, carries a different weight than a political statement. It implies operational intent, and markets treat that very differently. So what does a closure, or even the credible threat of a closure, mean in practice? Let's think through the layers. For energy-importing nations, particularly in Asia, The immediate concern is supply continuity. Japan, South Korea, India, and China are among the world's largest importers of Persian Gulf crude. A disruption to Hormuz flows means either drawing down strategic reserves, scrambling for alternative supply from producers outside the Gulf, or accepting higher prices, probably all three simultaneously. For Europe, which has worked hard to diversify its energy sources since the Russia-Ukraine conflict, a Hormuz closure adds yet another variable to an already complicated energy picture. For the global economy more broadly, energy prices are a kind of hidden tax on everything. When oil and gas get more expensive, the cost of manufacturing, transport, agriculture, and heating all move upward. That feeds into inflation, and central banks, many of which have only recently started to bring inflation under control, would face a genuinely uncomfortable situation. There's also a geopolitical dimension that goes beyond economics. The Strait of Hormuz sits at the intersection of some of the most consequential relationships in global politics: the United States and Iran, Iran and Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states and their Asian customers. A closure, even a short one, reshapes diplomatic calculations rapidly. The United States Navy has historically maintained a presence in the region precisely to keep these waters open. How Washington responds, and how quickly, will be watched extremely closely by every government that depends on Persian Gulf energy. And finally, there's the humanitarian and logistical dimension. It's not just oil. The same waterway carries goods and supplies into the Gulf states themselves. A prolonged closure affects the flow of imports into countries like the UAE and Kuwait, which rely heavily on seaborne trade. So how do we classify what's happened here? This is a geopolitical supply shock, one of the rarest and most serious categories of market event. Supply shocks come in different forms. There are natural ones: hurricanes, earthquakes, droughts. There are economic ones: a cartel cutting production, a country running out of storage capacity. And then there are geopolitical ones, where a political or military actor deliberately intervenes to disrupt the flow of a critical resource. Geopolitical supply shocks are particularly difficult to price and plan for because their duration and resolution depend entirely on political decisions, not economic logic. They don't follow a predictable curve. They can resolve overnight if diplomacy succeeds, or they can drag on for months if it doesn't. What makes this specific event so significant is the source of the declaration. The IRGC Navy is not a fringe actor making a statement for domestic consumption. It is the operational force that controls Iran's naval assets in the Gulf. When it says the strait is closed until further notice through state media, that is as official as it gets on the Iranian side. Whether it holds, whether it escalates, whether it becomes a bargaining chip in some broader negotiation, those questions remain open. But the declaration itself represents a major escalation in a region that has been under significant tension for years. For investors, for energy companies, for governments, and frankly for anyone who pays an electricity bill or fills a car with fuel, this is a story that deserves very close attention in the days ahead. If you found this breakdown useful, please subscribe to Investors Club Global. We cut through the noise on exactly these kinds of events every time they happen. Leave a comment below telling us which part of this you'd like us to go deeper on: the oil market mechanics, the geopolitical background, or the strategic reserve question. And share this video with anyone trying to make sense of what's happening. We'll be watching this situation closely and will update you as it develops.